Hello, I'm Shuja Nawaz, Distinguished Fellow at the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you to join us in a series of conversations that look at fighting terrorism and militancy in Pakistan. A series of conversations that I will moderate with key interlocutors inside Pakistan. We are going to do it in two parts. The first part will deal with state security, cross-border dynamics and law enforcement, and the second part will deal with Pakistani society, human security, and the social contract between the government and the people, particularly in the areas most affected by the militancy and violence in the border regions of Pakistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Now, today, Pakistan stands at yet another crossroad, and it's facing very difficult choices on how to revive its failing economy, its fractured political system, and how to balance the need for modernity and development with the rise of Islamist thinking. Compounding its deteriorating domestic situation is the re-emergence of the Afghan Taliban as the ruling group in neighboring Afghanistan. The Taliban are bent on establishing their radical brand of Islam and making Afghanistan a base for their allies, such as the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, that has sworn war against the Pakistani state. The Taliban have also revived the old Afghan objection to the Durand Line, which has been the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. They dream of uniting with their Pakhtun brethren up to the Indus River inside Pakistan, which would take a substantial portion of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and make it part of Afghanistan. Against this background, we are taking a look at the issues facing Pakistan today in the wake of the massive bombing of a Peshawar police mosque on 30th January 2023. That killed more than 100 persons and wounded many more. It brought back memories of the attack on the Army Public School in Peshawar 9 years earlier that killed over 150, most of them young students and teachers. In between, attacks in Balochistan also killed scores of innocent victims. Terrorism has never left Pakistan. From its height during the War on Terror after the invasion of Afghanistan by the United States and its allies in 2001, through subsequent decades. In recent years, terrorist attacks inside Pakistan have risen from 198 in 2020 to 498 in 2022. This year alone, there have been 62 attacks in just the first 2 months. Now, how will the Pakistani state and society respond? How will it resolve its ambivalence towards radical Islamic organizations inside Pakistan and in neighboring Afghanistan? And how will it revive the dream of a united federation of Pakistan that may not accord with a powerful center dominating a weaker periphery? We conducted a series of conversations with key experts and interlocutors representing a wealth of experience and knowledge about recent history and the interaction between the state and insurgents, militants, and terrorists. We divided these conversations, as I said, into two parts. First, we looked at state security, cross-border dynamics, and law enforcement. Second, we examined society in the border region, human security, and the social contract between government and its population. We hope these conversations will help us produce an initial map and a clear map for sustainable future actions, regardless of what political party governs Pakistan. Welcome, I'm Shuja Nawaz for the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to be joined by Senator Mushahid Hussain, who among his many other activities is the chairman of the Senate Defense Committee in Pakistan. And we have invited him to come and talk to us about the latest terrorist incident in Pakistan, which killed almost 100 people in Peshawar in the bombing of the mosque. Senator Hussain, I believe you've come from a joint session of Parliament today. Uh, what was the agenda, and was terrorism on top of the list?
Uh, Greetings from Islamabad. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Shuja Nawaz. And yes, you're right. I'm just coming from the Parliament. We are having an ongoing joint session. Today is the third day running. There's a long agenda, in fact. It has law and order and terrorism, as well as which was added on after myself and some other colleagues demanded that. But initially, it started with climate change, population explosion, economy, foreign policy, Kashmir, and so on and so forth. But as of today, they have added what they call law and order and terrorism, and which I think is a paramount issue for Pakistan in these difficult times. So the debate has started, and let's hope this debate will lead to an outcome, in my view, which will lead to a comprehensive, doable counter-terrorism strategy, which we currently lack at the moment.
Now, right after the Peshawar bombing, you took your committee to Peshawar. Can you tell us what happened during that visit?
Yes, the day after the incident, because it was a huge tragedy, and people were the whole house of worship, they were massacred, and over 100 fatalities and over 200 casualties. So we rushed to Peshawar the next day to show solidarity with the people of Peshawar, the grieving victims and people at the hospital. But we also had a very detailed briefing from the military high command in Peshawar, the local military commander, the corps commander, Lieutenant General Hassan, who was a very hands-on officer, and for 4 hours. And there were a lot of questions asked and so forth. What needs to be done? What is the issue? What is the context? What the military can do and what other stakeholders can do. And I think we were all the more wiser after this detailed briefing.
What about your meetings with civilian authorities? What are they doing?
The civilian setup is just in place a few days earlier when we went there, because it's a caretaker setup. And the caretaker setup under the constitution has only one mandate: to hold an election within 90 days since the provincial assembly was dissolved. And this is the law of the land. So they are just getting settled down, but we talked to the top cops and the police officials and other security people, and they are trying to now formulate that strategy with the military playing, of course, a pivotal role. But they are also looking towards Islamabad for guidance, for leadership, for direction. And I think that the main issue is that the organization that was supposed to be in the lead as a dedicated counter-terror force established 14 years ago, called NECTA, National Counter-Terrorism Authority, that has been lying dormant for a number of bureaucratic reasons, technical reasons, but above all, frankly, a lack of will. And although 10 years ago, when there was this other horrendous incident in Peshawar, the Army Public School massacre of school children by the terrorists, suddenly everybody came into action. But I think the approach is still very ad hoc, reactive, and moment to moment, not lacking, not really having a strategic clarity on how to go about it.
Going back to the Peshawar bombing, there was immediate activity on the part of then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and a national action plan was put together, which was a laundry list of about 20 items. But the organization that you referred to, NACTA, continued to remain in the Ministry of Interior and not in the Prime Minister's office, even when the Pakistan People's Party government took over. And they had an opportunity to make changes and to increase its budgets, but it was starved of funds and support. And from what you're saying, that has not changed.
Yes, regrettably so, that has not changed at all. And in fact, it should be the lead organization. And I had another meeting just before the Peshawar blast in Islamabad. I called a special meeting of the Defense Committee, and I called the generals from Pindi to discuss this from the Ministry of Defense. And we also, from our committee, we gave some written recommendations, which basically focused on, I said that there should be a troika of three organizations: NECTA, National Counterterrorism Authority; NADRA, which is the National Data Registration Authority, which is quite outstanding. I think probably one of the best in the third world, in the Muslim world, with comprehensive records of citizens, fingerprinting, forensic, and so forth. And they can really help in tracing people who are involved in these crimes. And the third one should be an intelligence coordination committee, ICC, including the lead intelligence organizations like the ISI, the military intelligence, the intelligence bureau, which is civilian, and the special branches and counterterrorism departments of the provinces. So a whole of system approach, if you will, in this regard, and that alone can take it forward. And I have a special, what I call a war room or a control room in Islamabad, picking up chatter, focusing on issues and keeping track of what's happening across the border with Afghanistan and otherwise also. So I think that this is no rocket science, it's doable. We've done it in the past. Pakistan is one of the few countries which fought very ably an inland war against terrorism under the armed forces with a lot of casualties from both the civilian and the soldiers alike. So we've done it before and it's still doable, but the important issue is lack of political will and lack of currently political cohesion, because there's so much political infighting and polarization in Pakistan's political system, and which is unfortunately reinforced by a rather bleak economic scenario.
Now, the Prime Minister called for an all parties conference, and then when Mr. Imran Khan and his party refused to attend, it was postponed. There's no new date that has been set. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. And I think that was also one of our demands when I made my speech in the Senate, along with others like Senator Raza Rabbani of PPP. They also said the same thing, that let's focus on that, bring everybody on board, whether it's government or opposition, because no one person, no one party, no one government, or no one institution can tackle this scourge of terrorism in Pakistan. So it has to be a collective approach to tackle a common enemy. And I think we should go ahead with formulating a strategy, at least, which is needed, irrespective of who comes to the conference or who doesn't come to the conference.
Now, there was another meeting of the so called Apex Committee at the center, which was attended by perhaps 70 or 80 people. That didn't produce any concrete results. But with your plan that you presented in your discussions with the military, do you think there's any likelihood of this new troika that you're proposing to be discussed and agreed to, not just at the center, but at the provincial Apex Committee meetings, which used to take place before?
One thing we should be very clear about, in Pakistan, if you have more than 10 people in a room, you can't take any decisive action. So if you have a crowd, then it will be just back and forth.
That applies
And
to all
I think
bureaucracies.
yes, absolutely. So I think that in the General Musharraf period, there used to be those apex committees at the provincial level and different levels, and basically the governor, the military commander, the chief minister together, and along with the local intelligence and police organizations. But once they also died down or withered away with passage of time, now they are being revived, and that's the beginning. But I think meetings about meetings is not the answer. The answer is to let's get cracking. As I said to in one of the recent meetings, that the Nike slogan is just do it, and do it tuck tuck tuck. There are 4 or 5 steps, and this is no rocket science. And people have done it. We have done it also. So, and if you have to make mistakes, let's make new mistakes. Let's not repeat old ones.
Well, it's also said that if you want to remove militancy and terror, you have to change the environment. You have to change the landscape. And that is something that has been a challenge in Pakistan. What do you see
Yes, some things
happening?
are not in our control
Yes,
because we live in a dangerous neighborhood.
yes.
There are situations, but I think the challenges are also opportunities. After all, when we deal with the regime next door in Afghanistan, they also need us. We also need them. We need them for peace. They need us for opening to the outside world, for economic relationship, for connectivity. And after all, about 5 million Afghans are still living in Pakistan as refugees, and they are a border crossing. So I think there's a mutual interest on both sides, and we need sustained, quiet diplomacy with the regime in Kabul to meet this threat of the terrorists.
But then it all comes down to the point you're making that you need political will at home.
Yes, and also strategic clarity on how to go about this is the issue, how do we tackle it, who will do what, and that involves diplomacy, that involves internal decision making, coordination on intelligence, and also the role of the military, the intelligence, the paramilitary, and the police. So it's a whole lot of decisions to be taken, but they have to be, timing is of the essence, and also, as I said, political will on taking this thing forward because the people want it. And as you know, there have been demonstrations in different parts of Pakistan saying that why don't we counter terrorism? Why don't we have peace in Pakistan? So popular opinion is there. The only thing lacking is political will as of now.
Senator Hussain, I think you've put your finger on it, and we'll leave it there, but we'll probably come back to you to get a status report on progress towards this end. Thank you for.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Welcome. I'm Shuja Nawaz for the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to be joined today by retired Lieutenant General Aamer Riaz of the Pakistan Army. We are discussing terrorism and militancy, and he has a great deal of experience in this field, and also in many of his key appointments, he was involved in issues related to terrorism militancy on the borders of Pakistan. Among his many appointments, as a Major General, he was the Director General Military Operations at Army Headquarters in Rawalpindi. When he became a Lieutenant General, he took over Southern Command in Quetta, and then he was moved to take the command of the Corps in Lahore. And from there, he moved to the National Defense University in Islamabad. Since his retirement, he's obviously continued his interest in all these issues, and I'm sure he has much more time to read now than he had when he was in service. So we're going to count on that. General Riaz, let me thank you for joining us and ask you right off the bat as to what is the current reaction after the attack on the Peshawar mosque, which is very similar to the attack on the Army Public School 9 years ago. Is the reaction the same, or is this going to be a different reaction?
Well, it was a massive terrorist act, and the reaction of the public is pretty much same. Public is saddened, public is worried. The situation which was there in those days when that unfortunate incident of APS took place, that situation is not there as we speak. There was much greater political harmony at that time, and unfortunately, that is not the case. We are passing through a bit of a difficult time politically in the country. So that reaction of the people perhaps is the same. The worry is perhaps is the same level, but the reaction on part of the state may not be the same. I'm afraid to say that.
One reason for this is obviously because there is a split between the provinces and the center. At the federal level, there is one government, and the two key provinces, Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, belong to an opposition party, whereas, as always in Balochistan, there's a coalition.
Yeah.
Is that a factor?
That's. I think it's a little more than that.
Yes.
Right now, there is interim government in Punjab. There's an interim government in KP as well, and people are waiting to see fresh election whenever that takes place. I'm not going to get into that kind of a discourse, but so it's not a government right now. It's an interim government. It's not a politically anchored government in the provinces, and the federal government itself is suffering from a lot of things. Economic situation is one, and political instability is another. And of course, this terrorism, growing terrorism, particularly coming from TTP. there has been, after this Peshawar thing, there has been a hit in Karachi as well. So I'm sure the law enforcement agencies are working day in and day out to find out a way to deal with it, but it has to eventually be a whole of a nation response led by the political forces of the country, and that is not to be as of today.
Now, looking back at what happened after the Peshawar attack 9 years ago, there was an expectation at that time too that the civilian government would take the lead and that they would take the lead in formulating a policy. In fact, there was a 20-point national action plan, which many WAGs are now referring to as the National Inaction Plan, because all those 20 points committees were set up and there was no action taken. And the military then essentially took the lead on its own. So this time, too, we are seeing that apart from the so-called apex meeting of the 70 plus people in a large room in Islamabad, there's been no follow-up on the part of the government. But the military has now launched intelligence-based operations. So what is this balance between kinetic versus non-kinetic means to counter terrorism and militancy? Is there any reality to this balance?
Oh, there is, of course. There's a great relationship between the two, the kinetic and the non-kinetic elements. Kinetic can take you up to a certain point, as we used to call back in the day that you clear, build, and hold, and you cannot hold until there is a political response which relates to governance, which relates to so many other issues which kind of push people into these activities. So there's a great relationship between the two. And let me also say that the military and the law enforcement agencies have started their coordinated operations. But in order to yield a full effect and create kind of a sustainable effect, there has to be a clear political backing. There has to be a public narrative, and then it has to be then translated into systems of governance, which will then follow on from there.
Now, one of the elements in that is the creation of authority and responsibility, particularly for the whole of government approach to this. Now, traditionally, the talk has always been that it has to be civilian led. And one of the elements in that in the earlier days was the creation of the NACTA, the National Counterterrorism Authority. Unfortunately, that has not yielded fruit. That remains in the Interior Ministry. It's not in the Prime Minister's office, and it hasn't yet become that focal point to bring the provinces together on the civilian side and to get the military and the civil together in one forum. Do you see any possibility of either NACTA or some other forum being created that is empowered to take responsibility?
I have a little different view on this. Um, Actually, the highest body which deals with the security in the country is the National Security Committee, and the NACTA should draw its strength from there. And if it draws its strength from the National Security Committee, of course, is an issue not related to the government. It is an issue which is related to the people and all political forces in the country. So, therefore, before that, there is a requirement for all political leaders to come together and have a uh, call it APC, all parties conference, or whatever name you want to give. But there has to be a general consensus on the broad outline of the strategy that is to be followed from here on. And then it is to be taken to the National Security Committee where the strategy is to be crystallized. And then the structures down under NECTA is one very important, should draw its strength from the national security. And then you have to have the structures at the provincial levels as well, which are then plugged into the national at the national level. And those structures also have to be under an apex committees, in my opinion, at the provinces, which sort of exist, but they have become non-existent over a period of time. So that was what you were referring to. The National Action Plan is kind of become a national inaction plan. So you need to have apex committees out there, and under that, the provincial counterterrorism effort has to be coordinated, which then has to be plugged into the national level. If that structure comes into play, obviously our responses will then start to take semblance of a whole of nation approach.
You've now taken me back a few years to those days. In fact, the one big difference I recall was that there didn't used to be a national security committee in those days. That was missing. And NACTA remained very much a subunit of the Interior Ministry. But the apex committees that you referred to were highly effective, if I recall, because they included, for instance, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they included the corps commander, the chief minister, and other senior officials, and they were able to make decisions and be able to implement them at the provincial level. Now, the prime minister did call for an all parties conference, and then it was announced to the press that one of the leading opposition parties, that of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, had refused to participate. But the other day, I was on a program with a senior official of the PTI, and he alleged that there was no formal invitation sent to the party, that this was just done through a tweet, through the media. So, unless, as you state, there is a national consensus, you can't really proceed.
That's right. This has to be achieved somehow. I'm sure that there are people in all political parties which will look at this as an issue of national import and not, you can't play politics on this, you know. So I hope they'll be able to galvanize and be able to come together in some form, even before this overall political stability kind of returns. Because the terrorism is not waiting, it's moving on. So, therefore, in my mind, there is an urgency of this. And I hope this urgency is felt by the rest of the people. And I'm sure in the military and those who are dealing with it in the CTDs, there are good CTD people who are working day and night in Sindh, in Punjab, in KP, and even in Balochistan. I'm sure that it is their concern as well to galvanize this kind of a political consensus, or we call it national consensus, at the earliest. I just hope it happens.
Now, you have experience in both the former FATA, because as DGMO, you were helping shape a lot of the policies dealing with the insurgency in that region. And then, of course, in Balochistan. To what extent has there been a credible attempt at shaping or reshaping the environment there, and particularly in recognizing the emergence of youth in Balochistan and in the former FATA as a key element in that new environment?
Well, yeah, you're right. You see, when you say that shaping of the environment, uh, it then also is a function of the state to shape the environment in which youth, both in there are two very different sets of problems in Balochistan and in FATA. In FATA, the fundamental issue is that of terrorism, which is now emanating mainly from TTP. They have their bases in Afghanistan, and they're kind of back, or they're trying to get back into Pakistan. So, dealing with the youth out there, I'm sure you know that the Pashtun youth is not kind of really attracted to TTP. They are very enterprising people, but there might be a very kind of thin minority out there because of their social disposition that they might be looking at TTP for ideological reasons, because there's no real ideology out there, or maybe for some other reasons which would relate to fundamentally socioeconomics. So therefore, there's a different way of dealing with it. TTP out there, uh, we have made some mistakes. Let's be honest. In post-US time, there was a little haste in dealing with TTP and starting a dialogue. Uh, it was ill-timed. The least I can say, it was ill-timed and it was ill-conceived, and that led to creating a bit of confusion uh, amongst the people, amongst the law enforcement agencies down under. The first up,
You're sorry to interrupt. You're referring to the negotiations that took place and then the invitation to the TTP to come back into Pakistan, but
yes,
without their weapons.
I'm talking about that discourse which took place,
Yes.
with TTP at that time. So that was, in my opinion, ill-timed and ill-conceived. So that created a lot of confusion. Uh, First of all, if you have to shape the environment out there, that confusion has to be removed. And there are several levels of that confusion. Number one, your law enforcement agencies should have no confusion in their mind what they're dealing with and how they have to deal with it now. Then the people of that area, they must also not have any confusion that it is as a result that the state is still wanting to have some kind of negotiation, some space is being given to these people. No, that's not the right thing to do. So shaping of the environment, first thing is that this confusion is removed from the minds of the people and from the law enforcement agencies. To a large extent, I think it has been achieved to a large extent as far as FATA is concerned. Now the larger thing is, of course, it remains an ethics committee, and a larger narrative, because our media is occupied primarily these days with the political discourse or the economic discourse, which is relevant, of course, but then the larger narrative is not in place to shape the environment. I'm sure there are people who are acutely worried about it and they are working in that direction. With regards to Balochistan, it's a it's an issue which has to be looked at entirely differently. Balochistan has, in different areas, the dynamics are different. In southern Balochistan, there are different dynamics. It's not a tribal system out there. In central Balochistan, you have a tribal system. Then you have youth, a lot of people who are now becoming more and more empowered with a lot of information. And then you have northern Balochistan, which is predominantly, it's a mix of Pashtun and Baloch, but it has. Then there are some overlaps of TTP as well in the northern Balochistan. There, the issue is that sense of political deprivation, the sense of economic deprivation. That needs to be addressed on a long-term basis. You have to invest politically into this, all political parties, and the state has to invest in this in the long term. While you can deal with the militancy through kinetic means, it will give you dividends. It may give you the breathing space, but within that breathing space, that province has to be dealt with in a different, completely different way, on the basis of
And
a
then
long.
sectarianism also plays a role. So could you share your thoughts on that?
Yes, and in some parts of Balochistan, sectarianism, particularly in Quetta, where we have significant Shia population also living. And this is not just the problem in Quetta, there's a problem in other parts of Pakistan also. That also needs to be dealt with, and for that, there has to be a larger political consensus within the state itself. There is a general consensus amongst people that this extremism is not acceptable to the people of Pakistan, but then we have to put in measures which relate to dealing with the madrasas, which relate to dealing with these kind of outfits, which relate to dealing with their funding, and which relate to uh, uh, kind of de-radicalization of a whole lot of people who have moved in that direction. So that again requires a systemic approach, uh, and for that, I dare say that the political stability and the focus has to return at the right place.
Now, those are a given. At the moment, economic instability, political instability, the confusion about when and if elections will take place in the provinces and at the center, that is dominating the thinking in Islamabad and the provincial capitals. But as you know, politicians tend to look to the immediate future. It's statesmen that look to the over the horizon issues and solutions. But if you were asked by the Prime Minister for one or two things that should or could be done in the short run that would lay the basis for what you call sustainable systemic changes, what would those two things be?
As I was talking about it before, immediately that the Prime Minister can do is, because of course this is going to be the start point, is not going to be the end point. The start point is to revitalize those systems. The apex committees must come back in again. National action plan is available, which requires a bit of resetting because a lot of time has lapsed in between. So they need to pick up the national action plan, have a relook at it, and just rejuvenate the systems that were existing at that time. And then, when political stability returns, you can put in place your long term strategy, which is different for Balochistan, which is, of course, different for FATA, and the issue of sectarianism, which is, to my manner of thinking, that's not related to the political instability or the economic. This is more ideological. There are some people who have gone too far in that. So that all that can be put in place. So three different sets of strategies can be put in place, but the structures, of course, will have to come into play now.
And from what I gather from your earlier remarks, the National Security Committee would provide the focal point at the center for the emergence of this national consensus.
That's right.
Good. I think let's leave it at that. I'm sure this is a topic we are going to come back to later, and I hope you will join us again when that happens as we look at progress on this front. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you.
Hello again. This is Shuja Nawaz for the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome to this discussion on terrorism and militancy in Pakistan, particularly in the wake of the bombing of the mosque in Peshawar recently by Malik Naveed Khan, who is a celebrated and well-known Inspector General of Police from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. He led a police force of something like 80,000 police and security teams during the height of the Taliban led militancy in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. He also established the first ever restorative justice, in Urdu known as Muslihati committees at the police station level in KPK. And he also established an elite police force developing, among other things, a counterterrorism department or directorate, and establishing a strategic planning unit, which is a think tank for the police department. He's had a celebrated career in the police, and if anyone knows militancy and terrorism, particularly in the border regions of Pakistan, it's Malik Naveed Khan. So, Naveed, welcome. And I'm going to ask you first to characterize the current situation. Is this primarily an internal issue of militancy and terrorism in Pakistan that is rearing its ugly head again? Or is this primarily a foreign fomented and supported activity?
Thank you very much, Shuja, for inviting me to this August forum. To begin with, I think our militancy is basically related to our past history of jihadis fighting against the Russians on behest of the United States and then leaving everyone in a lurch. And the jihadis then formed groups and all that, which everyone knows. But it was basically homegrown, and it just started in Swat. Piochar was their center. They took over Swat, and brutal acts were committed by them. And they were so powerful that the police could not handle them. So then the army operation took place. So basically, it is homegrown. And unfortunately, these are the consequences of the state sponsoring jihadis to serve national interests in inverted commas. When the operation took place against them, in 2017, they relocated themselves in Afghanistan. Quite a few were killed also. And there they regrouped. The Taliban government, despite the fact that they had committed to follow certain terms of the agreement, they totally failed. And one of them was that they will not allow militancy against Pakistan on its soil. They reneged on that, and on top of that, they released a large number of Taliban, TTP people, who were then also joined by the disgruntled elements of the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, some of Daesh, some of Islamic State of Khorasan, and then they got a lot of trainers also, and they regrouped themselves. And then an agreement was made with them that they will lay down their arms, they will be allowed to come in, lay down their arms, and they would become part of the mainstream politics, and that they will be rehabilitated. But when they came in, they not only did not lay down their arms, their intentions were totally different. And they instead demanded that the FATA be decision on amalgamation of FATA with the KP should be reversed. And the ceasefire that was declared, they totally sort of went over it, and they started this wave of terror. So basically, it is homegrown, but now it has got 35 factions. Some are supported by certain countries, and others are. So it's not one cohesive group actually. Secondly, having an agreement with criminals obviously does not bear fruit. And these people are
Let me
a
ask you
bunch.
about that. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask you about the agreement. Which agreement are you referring to, and who made it?
This was the Doha Agreement. Doha Agreement, which was sponsored by the Qatar government, and in which the United States representatives also participated. And they promised that they would not sponsor terrorist groups within on their soil, and they went against that. So it was those agreements, and
So it
also
was a
they had
Taliban agreement with the United States.
in Doha, Qatar. It is known as the Qatar Doha Agreement.
Yes,
So
I understand.
yes. So they started attacking all these installations and public gatherings, and the worst was to be seen in the mosque suicide bombing in the mosque in Peshawar police lines.
In the past, you and I have had exchanges about suicide bombings, and it was your opinion that suicide bombers are available to the Tehrik-e-Taliban and to other groups, some that are based outside Pakistan, but from within the country, that they don't necessarily have to penetrate the border. Is that still the case?
It is the case because a lot of people some from tribal areas, some from the settled areas, some from South Punjab, they join their ranks with the hope of being martyrs and going to the heavens and all that stuff that they believe in. And then they have trainers for suicide bombers. One famous trainer was Kari, who has already trained a lot of master trainers. And they get young boys from families, and then they brainwash them and then make them commit these acts.
It is being said that there is a change in the militancy and terrorism in the region after the departure of the United States and the allies, in that the Taliban and through them, the Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan are now equipped with the latest weapons and night vision devices that even the Pakistan military doesn't have, so they are outgunned. This is the view that is being shared by the Pakistani military higher command. Uh, to what extent do you think this is going to affect this militancy?
I think they will definitely have an edge, not an edge actually, but they are definitely more well equipped than they were in the past. For example, in Sarban police station, they killed a DSP with a thermal imaging device. And that is very dangerous because then they can fire from anywhere in the middle of the night. And they may be having other equipment also. But they have also had time to effectively train their people when they were in Afghanistan. So this time they are better trained and better equipped also.
So, against this disadvantage, do you think the Pakistani military and the police are going to be able to use kinetic force successfully to keep them outside Pakistan and to clear the areas where they seem to have re-established their presence?
They are actually present in quite a few places, especially in the KP. But like in the past, they don't have an area under their control. So it is not very difficult to handle them. If we have proper intelligence and effective kinetic action, I think it is possible. The army has done it. They have done it in the past, and I think they can do it again. But the solution will be temporary. We need a comprehensive long-term solution, and which I think can only be handled by the civil agencies because army action is always temporary, and also it has other serious issues like human rights violations, which bring a bad name to the country, and it does not serve the purposes of justice.
What would be the key elements of this comprehensive approach, which is not purely
Well,
military?
we have to develop our own counterterrorism departments. We must have a long-standing comprehensive strategy because we have been lacking on that front. The civilian governments have very easily handed over this baby to the army. They have not developed the police forces capacity. The counterterrorism departments are underfunded. The laws are defective. The entire criminal justice system is in such a disarray that only 20% of the terrorists are actually convicted, which is a very low rate as compared to 90 to 95% in the civilized countries. So that is where we are very badly placed. And unless we improve our criminal justice system and alongside have these counterterrorism departments with proper intelligence inputs, only then we will be able to take effective measures to curb this menace effectively and for a long time. But with the knee-jerk reactions, army actions, I don't think it will be a long-standing solution of the problem.
Well, changing the social and economic landscape will take time. Do you think the current government, particularly the caretaker government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, is going to be equipped to do that? And can the federal government do it at its level?
Well, this is a long-term measure. It will take years actually, but ultimately we have to go into this kind of a solution. Presently, there is no alternative to effectively deal with these Taliban through military action. And I personally believe that even of course, the Afghan government has to be on board, but even if they are not on board with us, we should, in hot pursuit, pursue these militants and hit them in Afghanistan also. This will give a clear message to the TTP and the Afghan Taliban that we cannot risk the existence and our security to a bunch of criminals and maverick citizens who are playing with the destiny of our nation. We have to be very, very clear about this. They have to be dealt with very, very effectively.
Now, to go back to your idea that this long term plan needs to be implemented starting at the provincial level, we don't see any action at the provincial level. The central government called a meeting of the Apex Committee, which brought about 70 or 80 people into a single room. Then there was the all parties conference that was called and that has not yet met. Uh, do you think this is something that the federal government can tackle, or is it something that's best left to the provinces?
Well, basically, Shuja, the law and order problem is by law and by constitution a provincial subject. The provincial police has to be reformed, and especially the counterterrorism department, so that it can deal with it effectively. But this time of political turmoil and financial bankruptcy, I don't see any immediate sort of attention of the government because the government itself is involved in a lot of problems relating to elections and to financial issues. So that will take a long time. I'm talking of long term. In the short term, I think what the meeting was also about was to get clearance from all the stakeholders to take effective action, meaning an operation against these terrorists.
It appears that the only action that emerged after that meeting was that of the military, which is ongoing, but there's been no civilian counterpart established as yet. Is that correct?
No. We have institutions like the counterterrorism departments, but they are no match
Yes.
to these Taliban. They have to be reformed, trained, and properly equipped, and proper infrastructure developed so that they can come up with effective kinetic energy to deal with this menace.
Well, that was my question. Are there any ongoing operations by the civilian CTDs?
Uh, they are, but not to the extent that is required. There have been some
I see.
information-based actions by the police, and they have neutralized quite a few of these groups. One was in Miawali, one was in Lucky Marwat. In one of them, 12 militants were neutralized. So wherever they get information, but looking at the scale of these militants, I think presently the counterterrorism departments may not be able to tackle the situation, and the army has to take take upon itself the action against the Taliban.
Thank you very much, Naveed Malik, for the insights, particularly at the grassroots level and particularly from the civilian side in tackling this issue. I'm sure that we'll be coming back to you for more commentary and advice as things develop in the medium to long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shuja.